Do I need this, or can you guys hear me okay? Microphone? Okay, guess I'm not loud enough. So I appreciate an audience that gets liquored up before I talk. It means you can indulge me a little bit more. And you can indulge my device love fetishes. But speaking of device love fetishes, I want to sort of start off by asking you guys a question. Does anybody have one of these iPhone things with them? Just raise your hand if you have an iPhone thing. Okay, so like 2 of you. That's interesting. Who has an Android thing? Okay, a couple hundred. Then BlackBerry? Yeah, it's okay. This is okay to have a BlackBerry. This is the East Coast, like I said more recently. On the West Coast, nobody would raise their... But here, in New York, it's okay to have a BlackBerry. Does anybody have a Nokia? No one with a Nokia? Okay, so you're all Americans. That's interesting. You have one? You're European. Okay, welcome to our country. There's a statue outside that greets you. Anybody with a Windows phone? I used to say Windows Phone Series 7, but last time I did that, some Microsoft guys, like, it's just Windows Phone now. Does anybody have a just Windows Phone now? No? Okay, so none of you work for Microsoft. That's interesting. It's easy to see the demographics here. Americans who don't work for Microsoft. I'm one of these iPhone people, complete with all the smugness and cheeky behavior you'd expect. That comes along with somebody who uses Apple products. And I'm also on the Twitters. So if you have any follow-up questions, you want to talk more about this stuff later on, by all means, hit me up over there. So today is just a pretty simple topic, but I think it's one that's pretty important. And the simple topic is, switch hands here if you don't mind. Simple topic is, we should start doing the things that we've been doing on the web and in digital software in general for mobile devices before we start thinking about desktop, laptop, and notebook experiences. And it's just a relatively simple idea. I'll get into why and how, but the reason why I think it's actually interesting to talk about this is we, for many, many years, and still today, continue to do the opposite. Right? When you start thinking about a website, or when you start thinking about an application, an internet-enabled application, you start thinking about the big screen first, the desktop, the laptop, the notebook, that. However, I believe we're quickly entering a time where the opposite is actually a better approach to start thinking about. And luckily, I'm not alone. This is the Google chairman, Mr. Eric Schmidt. And he likewise says, hey, we should be doing mobile things first. But he says it's because the Google programmers want to do that. And if you've ever been at Google, you know the programmers get to do kind of whatever they want. But Eric also has some actual reasons beyond that for doing mobile first. So this is CEO speak, so forgive me for a second. He calls the mobile phone the high-volume endpoint of a number of converging technology trends. And the 3 things that he calls out are, 1, is that those of you that raised your hands, which was pretty much every single one of you, have more processing power in your pocket than it took NASA to send somebody to the moon, which is pretty amazing. And everybody has access to a decent network, unless you're on oct18. But network connectivity in general is a pretty big deal. In Europe, I think in 2009, there's a 39% 3G penetration, and by 2014, so in a 5-year window, it's going to be 96%, which is just crazy when you think about how fast that happens. And the third trend that he talks about is the fact that we have things living in the cloud, both software, services, our data, our files, all these things. So there's stuff up there, we can connect to it, and we can do stuff with it because we have these devices in our pockets that have lots of processing power. And that opens up a ton of interesting opportunities. This is my friend Kate. She runs design and front-end engineering over at Facebook. Similar story here. Facebook increasingly is starting with the mobile experience first. As we follow a bunch of the announcements they've had over the past couple of weeks, we're starting to see this stuff actually become more and more visible in public. This is Mr. Kevin Lynch. And if you ever think about a company that sort of wasn't there with mobile until some of their recent announcements, he got up on stage at Adobe Max and said this shift that we're seeing right now with devices is bigger than even the PC revolution, so we can start thinking about mobile first. And since there's likely to be financial people here, I've sprinkled in a couple finance type of examples. This is my friend Bill. He's the creative director over at Bank Simple. And people always ask me, well, can I do this mobile first thing for my enterprise app? Or will this work in finance? Will this work in education? I don't see why any domain necessarily has to be excluded. And here's an example of where Bank Simple, who's trying to reinvent banking, what did they do? They did the mobile app first because it forced them to sort of figure out constraints. So there's examples across this everywhere. But I don't think you should do things just because people who make more money or play music better than us tell us to. I think there's actually real reasons behind this approach. So I want to spend the rest of the time actually digging into those real reasons. And in particular, there's a ton of very interesting growth which leads to opportunities for all of us. There's these really inherent constraints based on the ergonomics of mobile devices that force us to focus, and then there's all kinds of new things that we can play with to innovate. And all this stuff adds up to, I think, a really compelling story when looked at in aggregate. So the first one is this opportunity idea. And Morgan Stanley put out, if you're into data, Morgan Stanley put out a research paper about 2 years ago or so, where they sort of outlined trends in the mobile internet, and they looked at it globally, they looked at it across a bunch of different industries, and they put together this thesis which essentially says, hey, we had the PC revolution, we had the internet revolution, and this mobile consumer revolution is going to be another order of magnitude bigger. You sort of see with each cycle, essentially an order of magnitude increase in the number of devices in people's hands. Now, we're in a more financial area than the West Coast, so I suspect some of you are more adept at the maths than I am. And those of you who know the maths, do you find anything interesting about that 10 billion number? Yes, more people than, there are less people in the world than there are projected to be mobile devices in the world. So if you have a laptop or a desktop, raise your hand. And you have a smartphone, keep it up. And you have a tablet, keep it up. Okay, and you have like a PS3, Xbox, or Wii connected to the network. Okay, and you've got like a set-top TV box, Apple TV, Roku. Okay, start to see how this can happen really, really quickly. You have what? I have an internet-enabled wood dishwasher. Likes to nag me on Twitter. So we're seeing this big cycle of growth. And what does that mean? Well, so it's interesting to see all these big numbers, and I'll just kind of show this again. It's interesting to see all these big numbers and these growth curves, and the rate of growth being really tremendous. What everybody asks is, well, is this amounting to anything yet? Right? Are people actually making money off this stuff? This is sort of the line where all of a sudden people get interested in something if there's money to be made. Right? I feel like I'm telling you that, you know that. So, is there anybody actually making real money off this opportunity? Well, if you look at the things that sort of drive internet, right, the digital economy, if you will, commerce is a huge part of the digital economy. And eBay, just off a single iPhone app, essentially, 70% of their traffic on mobile comes to this one iPhone app, made about $2 billion. There's had 2 billion sales in 1 year. That's pretty real. Even on the mobile web, big retailer like Best Buy is seeing a doubling of users and conversions and all that. Social, which is another very big thing on the internet, or so they tell me. If you look at what's happening in Japan, this is, I think, a nice trajectory for us to think about. 4.5 years ago, 14% of their total page views, Mixi, largest social network in Japan, 14% of their page views 4.5 years ago are mobile. Today, 85% of them are mobile. So imagine if you go to a world where all of a sudden 85% of all your information and services are being consumed on these kinds of devices, you probably think about the design and development process differently. And then even things like, search, media. So Pandora, which is this music sort of engine, more than half of their user base subscribes to the service on mobile devices now. And email and you name it. So anywhere there's actually real stuff happening, there's real money being made on mobile now too, so people care. But that's a lot of little nuanced data. I don't want you to necessarily remember all that. If you walk away with only a single data point, this is the one I want you to walk away from this talk with. In that Morgan Stanley research paper that I outlined earlier, they made this very bold prediction. They said, within 2 years, the number of global shipments of laptops, desktops, and notebooks is going to be surpassed by the global number of shipments of smartphones. Right? And this is a pretty big watershed kind of moment. All of a sudden, worldwide, the network device landscape changes really significantly. Well, this happened 2 years earlier. at the end of the last quarter of 2010. And this is sort of the theme with all these crazy predictions. A lot of people have been saying mobile's the next big thing, mobile's the next big thing, but it's really actually happening this time. And like I say, pretty much any crazy projection you see is starting to come true faster and faster. In fact, Google's Eric Schmidt, who I quoted earlier, he went up and gave a keynote at the Mobile World Congress, and basically this is what he repeated for an hour. Oh, we predicted that, oh, but it happened faster. We thought this was going to happen, oh, it happened faster. Right? So if you want to hear that message for about an hour, you can watch that video. Now, what does this mean? What does this mean when we see this shift in personal computer usage? And when I say personal computer, right now the definition of a personal computer is this big plastic tower that sits underneath your desk that when you come to it, you basically have to blast it with an air can, right? And so it goes, takes a bit to start up. You know what I'm talking about? Right? So that's what people call a personal computer, and they include laptops and other things in that case. But the use of these types of devices at home, according to ComScore, has dropped 20% over a 2-year period. And when they dig into, well, why is that happening? Well, people are getting things done in between hours on their smartphones and their tablets and their more portable devices. So you're not just waiting to get home, to get into the office or into the den and sit in the chair and fire up the box, right, before you actually do things. You do it everywhere and anywhere. And so this is actually having a pretty big impact, right? There's this shift in usage of what was the personal computer to what is the personal computer. You also start to see it in actual applications. So visitors to all web-based email sites, not just Gmail, in the US at the tail end of 2010 dropped 7%. On mobile devices, it jumped 36%. And in 2010, we had about 32-34% penetration of smartphones in the United States, and you're already starting to see this type of swing. Right? Again, very early indicator, 30% of people have a smartphone. That's like the loose definition of smartphone, including relatively crappy ones. And you already start to see this level of shift. And I say relatively crappy ones, it sounds a little bit like a joke, but there actually is a really big difference in the type of device you have and the amount of searches that happen on it. So even though just a little side note, even though you see all these huge numbers about all these Android devices being shipped, 2/3 of Google's mobile web searches still comes from iOS. Right? So there's a big disparity in what kind of device you have and how much you actually use it. So shift in usage, but it's not just a shift in usage, it's also new usage emerging. This is one of the things that is really an undersold story about mobile. What's the biggest constraint on our time right now? Time. That sounds silly. What's the biggest constraint on us being able to get things done? Time. And so what mobile allows us to do is it opens up all kinds of new time where we're connected to the network and to digital information and services. You know, it's not just we have a 2-hour block at the end of the day or in the middle of the day, we've got a 5-hour block. We can get online anywhere and everywhere. And so applications like Yelp, which is this local review service, even though only 7% of their total user base uses mobile devices, that user base is responsible for more than 1/3 of their total searches. Right? In addition, they create all kinds of new use for Yelp. Every other second they call a local business or they generate driving directions. This is new. This wasn't happening with the types of devices they had previously. Zillow is a real estate company. The people that use their service on mobile devices are actually in the neighborhood where they want to buy a home. What are they going to do with that opportunity? It's a totally new kind of mode of use enabled by this device. I mentioned Facebook earlier. People that use Facebook on their mobile devices are twice as active as people who don't use, twice as active on the desktop as people who don't use mobile devices. And this is one of the interesting things about securing a cross-channel customer. You sort of assume if you have somebody that uses your service on desktop and the web and on mobile, it's 1 + 1. But what most companies start to see, it's actually 2 + 2. And that's why everybody gets so gung-ho about trying to be in all kinds of places to meet their customers. And those of you that are astute and actually have one of these devices might say, well, hey Luke, isn't this all just great internet use, right? But doesn't all this happen through native applications? How does the web fit into this thing? Isn't it all mobile app, mobile app, mobile app? Well, it's true that when you're on your fancy Google Nexus S, you may be twittering on the native Twitter client. And it's also true that Twitter has a lot of activity on mobile. 40% of all new tweets. And the other one's actually more surprising to me. People make these assumptions, no one's going to do this, no one's going to sign up on mobile. Who's going to sign up for Twitter on mobile? Well, 60% of all their new users are signing up there. Right? So it's sort of dangerous to assume that people won't do stuff just because they have a small screen. But we'll talk about that more later. Anyway, what are the top 2 Twitter clients? Actually, it turns out the mobile web is the biggest one. SMS is second. In fact, in the browsers where Twitter had their biggest growth back in 2010, mobile web browser use. Facebook, and so they recently spent a lot of time designing their mobile web experience. Facebook's the same story, a third of all posts created on mobile. What's the biggest client? You guys know the answer to this. The mobile website by a big shot. Right? And these guys are sort of the biggest player in mobile relative to apps of anybody. Pretty much every single platform, the number 1 app is Facebook. And so they spent a lot of time recently redesigning their mobile web experience, and as of last week or this week, they just did it again. Right? They're investing a ton of time in this particular aspect. So the thing about the web, in addition to this, is people assume that native apps are really the things that are driving forward. Pretty much everywhere you look, both things, in terms of internet use, are growing. And this is what leads us to say that the mobile web experience is also sort of a first-order experience. If you look at the crazy statistics I showed you earlier, all these devices are going to shift in 2012. It happened 2 years earlier. I suspect this is going to happen sooner rather than later as well. And when you have more people accessing websites and information using mobile devices and PCs, again, the case for starting with the mobile experience first makes a ton of sense. Right? You can capitalize on that opportunity. And it's not just the big guys. The average person with a smartphone hits 24 different sites a day, and the big guys, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, are only 40% of that. So what does this mean to you? It means that your site or service is totally fair game for this type of use as well. Right? It's not monopolized by Facebook. And even proxy browsers that try to make things better on little crappy feature phones are doing pretty good. So, to summarize that little piece before I throw the next kind of scary news at you, there's a ton of growth in mobile, right? It's this sort of shift between what used to be the personal computer to what currently is becoming the personal computer, the thing that's in our pocket, always connected to the network. That's creating new amounts of time where people can be connected to digital services, and it's creating totally different kinds of opportunities. People in the neighborhood where they want to buy a home, cross-channel opportunities where people use each service more in each channel rather than just in a single channel. And all that stuff is a great reason to start thinking about mobile when you start thinking about what you're going to do next, because you don't want that opportunity to pass you by. Right? You don't want somebody else to come in there and shake things up. Like let's say in banking, Bank Simple starts with this mobile experience. They figure this stuff out. What's next? And I'm going to come back to the banking example in a second because of this data. So in Asia and in Africa right now, 50% of people who connect to the network do not do it on a desktop, laptop, or notebook. In India, 49% of people never or infrequently use a desktop to get on the network. They're using mobile devices. Probably not that surprising to you, right? How about now? UK, 22% never or infrequently use the desktop to get on the internet. Much scarier? US, 25% of people. And flip that forward to 2015, more than 50% of all traffic, again, coming from mobile devices. So what you're starting to actually see is a generation, if you will, and a culture that really has grown up with the network and a mobile-only mentality. And this, to go back to the banking example, in Silicon Valley, people refer to Kenya as the Silicon Valley of banking because of all the innovation they're doing there in financial services, and all of it's really driven through mobile devices, SMS, all kinds of things like this. And it's very hard for us to go back and say, okay, let's just remove 30 years of graphical user interface from our memory. Let's just remove 20 years of what the World Wide Web has been from our memory. Let's just assume the way we get on the network is through a mobile device. It's a very, very hard exercise for us here. But there are entire generations of people that's how they start to use the network. And the kinds of ways they envision sharing information, accessing digital services is probably not something that we can quickly and easily wrap our heads around. As a thought exercise, my friend Jason Grigsby was trying to do away with his laptop for a month. He's like, I can't do that, that's crazy. I can't get anything done. Yet, many people are, right? And that shows just sort of how shackled, quote unquote, we are. So this is actually even more interesting. But it's not all about these numbers and this growth and taking advantage of that opportunity. I think there's actually a different kind of opportunity here, which is very exciting to me personally. This is my friend Joe Hewitt And he is the man who created this application, which is arguably the most popular mobile application ever, Facebook for the iPhone. That's not the exciting part. To me, the exciting part is when he basically said this. Just first he wanted to make a mobile campaign, but then he realized he could actually make something better than the website on the mobile device. And that's the second piece of this mobile-first argument, right? The first piece is let's ride that big growth curve, don't miss out on this opportunity. We're seeing a shift in what is a personal computer. The second one is the things that are inherent to mobile devices force us down to better experiences, which I think is great. So, as a simple example of one of these constraints, for years we had fights on the internet about how much pixel space we have. Right? Did anybody lose a friend to this battle? So we fought, we figured it out, and finally we said, okay, it's probably 1024 by 768. Let's work within that, 950 grid, whatever. Right? So let's assume this is what we have to work with. It's not. It's all variable. But then you take kind of the typical average smartphone screens as, again, sort of an illusion. But when you go from 1024 by 768 to 320 by 480, you just lost 80% of your screen space. That means 80% of the crap you have on your web page needs to go away. And I love that. Because most web pages are filled with crap. Sorry, but it's true. Does anybody have a web page they'd like to remove 80% of so they can do what they want on it? Yes, you all would like to do that. You know, it's not like Southwest Airlines doesn't get this. They clearly only have the focus on the stuff that matters when you go to their website. There's nothing I would want to remove here. I'm blessed that they think Lucky in Love is that important that I can engage in it. It's fantastic. Now I'm going to step back from the jokes for a second and talk seriously. Anybody familiar with this psychology principle called change blindness? So basically change blindness, I show you two images, right? And because they're so similar, it's hard to tell the difference. Your brain can't pick it up. And you're sort of blind to the change, if you will. So I'm going to show you the desktop version, and then I'll show you the mobile version, and I'll just be aware of this phenomenon, okay? Tell me if you see a difference. Does anybody see it? Let's try it. Let's try that again. Sure, one more time, why not? People are drinking. There you go. So what do we see in the mobile experience for Southwest Airlines? Well, how does Southwest Airlines make money? They sell air reservations and car reservations. What do their customers want? Airline reservations and car reservations. It's right there, front and center, in your face. Ongoing customers, people that have already made a reservation, they want to check in, they want to check their status, or they want to manage their rapid rewards. So what you see here is the way the company makes business, why they exist, and what their customers all want to do, and there's nothing else. Right? It's really targeted and focused. And because you literally physically don't have room for all this other stuff, you get down to this prioritized list really quickly. And when you work with all your stakeholders or anybody that's involved and you say, okay, well, we have this constraint, what belongs on here? Why not take that agreement and put it wherever, in any screen size you happen to have? Right? Just apply that same prioritization and focus. Another example, this is a photo sharing site called Flickr. Many of you probably know it, but you probably don't know all of it. Over the years, it has grown, they've added lots of features and new things. But when it came time for them to design their mobile web experience, they went from this to this. 60 plus options down to about 6. Right? Again, they had to prioritize, they have to focus. They can't fit 60-something options in a tiny little screen. So how do they do that? Well, it's just design 101, know your audience. What do people who use Flickr do? Well, they keep checking in to see if anybody has commented on their photos. Or any of their friends have uploaded anything new, or they want to kill some time because they're bored. And so front and center is like the way people actually use the service and the things that matter to them, and they do that because they understand their audience. Sort of design 101. And so this mobile-first experience of starting with that tight constraint, of having much less physical space to work with, gets you down to, I think, a more prioritized set of functions and features that actually matter. The desktop experience is sort of like the carpet in the bathtub, if anybody knows how that works. You put a carpet in the bathtub, you keep feeding it, it'll grow to the size of the bathtub until it can't move anymore. The same thing happens to the websites. We'll just keep filling them with pixels until there's no more room, and then somebody there's a blank spot. Lucky in Love. But it doesn't just apply to these homepage things. I fly a lot. I used to use Expedia to book my travel. This is the page on Expedia that tells me what time my flight takes off. You laugh, it's not a joke. Here's the information right there. This is the useful part of the page. Everything else should probably pixelate and die. Now let's again compare the desktop experience of Expedia with the mobile experience. Is this the same company? And they even have used visual hierarchy appropriately. If you look at the page, the information sort of pops out. And they have these nice features. You can move by date and by itinerary. And here's the real kicker. When I just start their mobile app, it has this little text that says, where should I be? Flip it and see. I flip it sideways, it says, get your butt to Terminal B, your flight's leaving in 15 minutes. All I do is turn the device. It uses the accelerometer to give me this information. Right? Again, compare those two experiences. Turn it, go to Terminal B, versus trying to dig through that mass of text to figure out what time my flight's leaving. And again, the constraints, I think, of mobile force you to focus and get down to more relevant things. Here we actually saw a capability, this device orientation thing. I'll talk about that more later. Another constraint. You never know when that's going to happen to you. As a result, performance actually matters. Right? Even if you're sitting on a big, and by the way, replace AT&T with whatever you want. I was in the Czech Republic, I switched out Vodafone with AT&T in the slide, and all the Czech people were like, ha 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 ha. Here it's AT&T, other places it's something. They don't actually sound like that. That's just how I sound when I go there, because I eat lots of sausage. And so we really care about how to make things fast. Now I'm not going to go through all this stuff, but there's a number of things you can do to really optimize performance for mobile. Generally send less stuff, smaller stuff, take advantage of all these new techniques. But the bottom line is, if you start with mobile first, with these really tight constraints of speed and performance, when you get to the desktop, things are going to be blazing fast. And every single time anybody has ever measured whether or not performance is important on the web, they find out it's crazy important. Right? Here you go, Amazon, Yahoo, Google, Microsoft, AOL. 100 millisecond delays lead to really big drops in usage and revenue and everything, and engagement. Right? And speed. And in fact, these effects last long term. Google studies have shown that 3 weeks later, after they repair a speed delay, people still use the service less. So if you make it fast enough for the situation I showed you on the mobile device, it's going to fly anywhere else you run. And the last constraint is both an opportunity and a constraint, but it basically deals with how people use these mobile computers that they have with them. When we think about traditionally the mode of use of a large screen laptop or desktop or something like that, we have a pretty decent sized screen, probably have consistent power somewhere nearby, there's usually a network, we got a keyboard, a mouse, a chair, a desk, and the last known Apple accessory released in the suite, the coffee mug. When you move to mobile, pretty much all those things are different. The screen is really small, it has to fit in your hand, right? It has to be palm size so you can bring it with you places. The battery, it's portable, the battery can die. The network isn't the same everywhere. Because it's small and needs to fit in your hand, it makes sense to turn the entire screen into an interface so you can have more area to work. So we use these things with our fingers. They have sensors, they know where we are, they know the direction we're facing, they know how close to our face they are. So they can turn off the screen when we talk on them. So all these things, I think, really make this much more personal than that previous computer. And they also lead to different interaction points. So that's kind of some of the ergonomics around the differences. Then there's actually the usage. So where do we use these devices? Many people, when they think about mobile use cases, they think about, I need to get a phone number for a restaurant, right, while I'm out on the street, or I'm running late for a meeting. Sort of the stereotypical use case of mobile pops into everybody's head. This guy, right? Well, where do people actually use their smartphone? 84% of them use it at home. Probably sitting on the couch while watching a TV show, farting around on Facebook. Admit it, you all have done it. 39% of people say they use their smartphones in the bathroom. It means 61% of people are liars. People use it during miscellaneous downtime, waiting in line, at work, so pretty much anywhere and everywhere. And this is both a great opportunity for new engagement, but it's also a constraint. Right? It's a constraint because when you're out and about in the world, see this place, there we go. When you're out and about in the world, there's things going on. So you have these little moments of time. Ooh, this car, somebody would like this car. There's other cars driving by, there's stuff going on. If you're playing a little game outside in the yard, there's birds or cats or whatever you happen to keep in your backyard. So there's all these like distractions. We're not locked in a room, in a cubicle, facing a computer for 5 hours. We have this much more shorter, bursty activity throughout the day. And yes, there are times you have a marathon Angry Birds session where you lock yourself in a closet with your iPhone, but that's usually a rarity. It's not the norm. And so because we have all these different opportunities, I like to think of people as one thumb, one eyeball when we design for mobile, because it embraces this fact that we don't have all their attention all the time, in many cases, right? And partial attention really requires us to simplify and focus the design down, which is why I think this is sort of a constraint. Last piece we can look at, and this is where stuff gets really interesting for me, is when do people use these devices? So this is data from a service called Read It Later, and Read It Later is exactly what it sounds like. You save an article to read later. This is when people actually read stuff later on desktops, laptops, and notebooks. And what basically happens is they're asleep, they wake up, they read, they eat dinner, they read, they go to bed. Pretty clear. This is when people on their iPhones read the exact same articles. This is the theme, this is the message here. This is the exact same behavior. The only thing that I've changed is the device. And so what you see when you look at this was one, pretty much still any time, people will pull out the mobile phone to read something, right? But compare it to computer use, compare it to computer use, it's this shorter, burstier behavior, right? It's not these long, extended sessions that we saw with the computer. It gets even more interesting when you look at something like the iPad, and you compare that to computer use. So, when are people reading these same articles, same use case? When are they reading them on the iPad? At night, in bed, on the couch. Swear, it's just tech articles. Again, just swap out the device. Here's another example. This is the social professional network, LinkedIn, where you all have put your resumes. And this is when people access it during the day. This is when people access it during the day on mobile. What's going on there? Totally different use, right? This is my theory. I'm at work, it sucks. I'm at work, it sucks. I'm going home, look for a new job, look for a new job. Could be. Something's going on there, right? It's totally different. Here's another example. Now this one's actually totally randomized, devoid of any use case. All this is the type of device that was connected to a 3G network and just grabbing one data point from one device at random. And you immediately see there's a big difference between laptop, tablet, and smartphone, right? When are they on the network? How long are they on it for? What are people doing? And you can see the smartphone's like, I'm. Did they respond to my Facebook post? No. Did they respond to my Facebook post? No. Did they respond to my Facebook post? No. So, these constraints, screen size, speed of network, modes of use, all of these things add up to an increased focus, I think, right? We have a lot less screen space, we have to think about what really matters, we have to prioritize stuff down, the network could be gone or slow, so we really have to focus on making things fast. These modes of use, people can use these things anywhere and everywhere, but they're doing so in distracted environments. All this forces us to think really, really tightly and focus things down, but also to consider real-world use cases. So this is a little comment from XKCD. And on the left, they have things that are on university homepages, like press releases, slideshows, letters from the president. And on the right, they have things you actually care about, like department course list, campus map, academic calendar, what have you. And I was really heartened when I read this post by Dave Olson on the Higher Education for Mobile blog. And he said, when I looked at what we were doing with the mobile site, it was only the stuff on the right, none of the fluff on the left. Now, why is that? A, there's no room. B, the bandwidth goes, what are you going to do, download a 4 meg image of the president of the university, like holding a plaque, right? No, you're going to put the stuff that actually matters on that. And because of these modes of use, because mobile gets used everywhere and everywhere, you sort of naturally gravitate to real-world use cases, right? Oh, someone's on campus, they need to find the location. Oh, somebody's running late for class, maybe they want to look up their schedule, or all these sorts of real problems, real situations that people run into. So all those constraints, again, when you start from mobile first, lead you over here, which I think is fantastic. So growth, shift in usage, new usage emerging, opportunity to be part of that story, constraints, things like screen size, things like performance, things like mode of use force us to get down to what I think drives better design, and ultimately better design, aka for our customers, drives better business, because those two things are in line. Right? Companies that don't do things for their customers very quickly don't have customers. Sad but true. So last but not least, I've given you all these constraints, narrow things down, it's small, it's slow, doesn't really sound like a great environment for design, right? Boring? No? Okay, well, good, because it's not boring. We have all these capabilities that allow us to do things in a new way. Simple capability that I outlined earlier is this idea of device orientation. So if I flip my phone on its side, I can just make sure my layout works, right? So it sort of stretches appropriately. Or I can actually use that as an opportunity to create a better experience. So on Android, if I'm composing an email and I flip the device sideways, all of a sudden it gives me a bigger keyboard, more room to type, and it moves the button over to the right. This could have been a worse experience because those 3 fields could have not fit in there and the keyboard would be all smushed, right? But instead they said, okay, when somebody flips this thing to its side, we're going to actually give them more room to compose an email. We're going to make it better. And this is the theme for this whole section. This device orientation, ability to know what way the device is facing, is a technical capability. It's not technology for technology's sake. We're using that piece of technology as like a palette, if you will, as a paintbrush or as a piece of paint or whatever analogy you want to use, to solve people's needs, right? So another example using the same capability, this device orientation thing. What could be more boring than reading an article on the web? Happens millions, if not hundreds of millions of times a day. Hasn't been innovated on since 1994, when Mosaic sort of made a visual web browser. Well, with the accelerometer, you can do something like this. This is a service called Instapaper. It's also for reading. And here, just tilt the device when you want it to scroll. You want it to scroll faster? Tilt it a little more. You want it to scroll back the other way? Tilt it the other way. So it's using this technical capability and applying it to these use cases of reading something to fix things, right? And this works great when you're in a subway until you hit a bump. Reading, hang on. So that's one model. This is actually using the gyroscope. So that's a 360 degrees of motion of the device, not just this orientation change. And this is a 360-degree image. And you have to imagine that somebody's actually holding this in their hand and tilting and panning the device. I had a hard time capturing that in video, so I did this instead. But let's say you want to go and take a look at a house that you're interested in buying. Right? Well, pull it up on your device and tilt it and pan it as if you're in the room and move through a 360-degree photo of it inside the web browser. And all you got to do is move the device around. Another capability that we can use to innovate on a core use case. The core use case is I want to see what this house looks like. This is something we can use to solve that use case. Touch is another interesting capability we have in these devices. I'll go through this one kind of quickly, but these statistics are a little shocking for some people. Many people don't realize that even 2 years ago, there was 1 million touchscreen phones that made it into people's hands per day. That means during the time we're here, 1 million people can all of a sudden interact with our services using their fingers, right? Pretty big deal. Today, between the iPads and the iPhones and the Android devices and all this stuff, there's close to 1 million just of those 2 operating systems being activated / sold per day. And then people say, well, what about these laggards that don't do touch, like Microsoft or like Nokia and RIM, where they have trackballs, keypads, trackpads, keyboards. Sorry, all those words get mushed up. Well, even these guys are going to more direct manipulation interfaces because, frankly, it just makes sense. Right? It's a small device that has to fit in your palm. Why not turn the whole screen into an interactive surface? There's few things you can count on in mobile. I think the move to touch is one of the very few things you can count on. And even when you look at Nokia's sort of device mix, the dark green is how many things support touch. Right? You can really clearly see the story being told here. Right? And probably even further with the fact that all Nokia's smartphone OS is now our Windows Phone, which is a touch-based UI. So what does this matter? Well, on the one hand, it matters because people are using their fingers to interact with these devices. We want to make sure they can. So things like touch target sizes matter. And there's a lot of rules and sizing constraints around how big it should be. It all stems from the fact that our average human finger pad is around 8 to 10 millimeters, which is where you get these recommendations from Microsoft around how big it should be, the minimum distance between them, stuff like that. I won't go too far into this, just sort of skip through it real fast, but this is what you want to avoid. Anybody see a problem here? My fat French fry eating fingers cannot log me into Quora. So that's one thing, like touch target sizes are a big deal. And then the actual gestures you have available to you. Again, I want to go through this quickly because I'll actually give you guys a URL with all this information. I want to talk about the more juicy stuff in a second. So we did this audit of all the different touch gestures supported on each platform. And you can imagine things like tap, multi-finger tap are there, dragging and flicking things with single and multiple fingers, pinching and spreading things, pressing and holding, pressing and tapping, rotating. And what we did in this doc is took these standard gestures that are common to all these platforms and sort of laid out more. If somebody wants to change modes, what's the gesture that's most common for that? So you have a little bit of vocabulary about how to use these things. As I promised, you can just go and take all this information and download it. And there's all this detail about touch target sizes and gestures. And now, thanks to Kimberly Fulton in Seattle, you can actually print out these pretty little cards that have all the different platform gestures and all the core gestures and all that sort of stuff. So forgive me for going through that quickly, but like, self-serve. That's what the internet's for. Okay, so now we got these cool, we know generally how big touch targets should be. We've got all these gestures we can play with. What do we do to innovate the UI? Because it's in their capability, right? And we can do small things like Yahoo Mail has this little drag shortcut. So if I drag my finger across an email message, I can delete it right there, I can file it away, I can forward it, whatever. Right? This isn't the only way to do this. I can still navigate down to the email message and do the same stuff, but they use this touch gesture as a little shortcut to allow me to do that. This is Twitter in the web browser, and I pull down, it refreshes and reloads the latest stuff. Which when people put this out at first, nobody knew this was possible. But now, I find people that have used this once or twice expect it in many places. So very quickly, things that are hidden and transparent in terms of gestures become expectations. Yahoo Mail also does this pull down to reveal a search thing, and they give you a little message about it. The bottom line is, I think we have an opportunity to move beyond Chrome for UI. So in this example, if I want to see what's inside a pile of photos, open up that pile of photos. If I want to move that list of photos, I'm going to touch the list of photos and move it up, and then I'm going to move it down. If I want to see one of the photos, I'm just going to touch that photo. I want to see the next one, get that one out of the way. Get that one out of the way. So you never saw this person touch a scroll bar, or an icon, or a menu, or a window, right? All the interactions were directly with content. And this is the sort of thing you can start to do with this capability of touch that wasn't really possible when we have indirect manipulation. With indirect manipulation, something else is doing the touching for you. Right? The mouse cursor is doing the touching for you, or the trackball or the keypad is moving you up and down. Here, you, content, direct interaction. So these principles around these natural user interfaces reduce visuals that are not content. Content is the UI. Reduce the distance as much as possible between user and content. I love this kind of stuff. And I think it enables us to really innovate in lots of different and interesting ways. I also think we haven't really started at all to figure out what this means yet. Right? All the examples I showed you are sort of like baby steps right now. Okay, other capabilities, so that was touch. I'm just continuing on this theme. Here's some capabilities that we can do with it. We got location detection. That means on Kayak I can find a hotel near me right now. To use another finance example, I can find an ATM near me. There's lots of distant systems inside of an average smartphone that tell you this. 2/3 to 3/4 of the time that the iPhone locates itself, it uses Wi-Fi. It's down to 50 meters. Your desktop computer can tell us we're in the US right now. Yay. What do you do with that? Nothing very interesting. Whereas, if I know your location down to 10 meters or 50 meters, I can create this app. And this app solves two use cases. Again, remember, technical capability, actually solving real use cases, people's needs. In this case, the use cases we're talking about is if somebody's running late for a meeting or they happen to be married. If either of those factors is true, you may find it useful to share your location and immediate progress to another location with somebody else. So what this application does, Glimpse, and this runs in the web browser, allows me to say, hey, here's a glimpse of where I am right now, and it'll tell me how long it'll take before I arrive where you happen to be. So those of you who may be late for a meeting or married may find this useful. And now I've touched on a couple capabilities. I talked about device positioning, I talked about the gyroscope, location detection, multi-touch, I talked a little bit about orientation, but there's so much more, right? When you start with the mobile experience, you have this whole palette of stuff to work with. You don't have all this on the desktop. So you could lose all these opportunities to rethink interactions. I'll just do a couple more to kind of hammer this point home. I know where you are on a mobile phone. I also know the direction you're facing because there's a digital compass or a magnemeter, right? So using those things, I can solve problems differently. I was in London, I wanted to tour the sites, I knew the best way to do that was the London Underground, so I wanted to find a London tube station near me. I pop open my laptop, I go to the Googles, I type London Underground, I end up on the site. The lakes are blue, that's great. There's the tube map thing. You know, somebody thought about the IA a lot. It's good use of white space. I click on it, I move to the next page. Visually, it's clear what's a map. I can find the link again quickly. Somebody labeled it as a PDF, told me how big it is. Lots of great usability best practices, things we've worked on for years in effect here, right? Click on it, and I get the PDF, and now I can find the nearest tube station here. Why are you laughing? If I demoed this to you 6 years ago, it would have blown your mind. You'd be like, whoa, and type into a box, and I get the map. Seriously, it was revolutionary stuff, right? Like Google plus internet, hello. But what are we using to solve this use case? Pages, SEO optimization, layout, right? Links. Those are the tools we have in front of us. It's not that same list of things that I showed you have in a mobile device. In a mobile device, we have a whole bunch of other stuff. So, same use case, find me a tube station near me, I pop open an app called Nearest Tube, and it overlays on my current view of the world where the nearest tube stations are. As I rotate and change position, it knows my position, it tells me where it is. Now it senses a device orientation change, and it gives me more detailed information about the tube stations near me, what lines they serve, what their status is. If I tilt the device up even higher, it'll give me stations further from me with that same level of depth. Right? All in all, this quote-unquote augmented experience looks a little something like that. Now, I'm not suggesting this is necessarily better, because frankly they both have usability issues, but holy crap, are they different? Right? Same use case, I want to find a tube station near me, different set of capabilities, totally different experience. And those of you that say, oh, this augmented reality stuff, that's just crazy. Yes, the interfaces are kind of crappy and they're hard to use, but even Yelp, who turned this on as an Easter egg, kind of for fun, was blown away at what happens when people use it. And I think the potential here is enormous, which is based on my current position and orientation, my current view of the world, the way I'm experiencing the world, give me the relevant digital information that matters for me right then and there, right? Restaurants, tube stations, whatever. It's kind of mind-boggling stuff when you start to think about it at that level. And yes, some of this you can only do with a native app. Mobile web only has half of it. Tons of people are trying to get access to the two things that are missing here, the video camera and the digital compass. There's standards around that. We'll probably hit parity a little slower. The price you pay building for the web is broad access, but you don't get as close to the metal. That's life. And here's the stuff they promised. We'll see if it comes out. Other things you can use with the camera, point it at a barcode, it'll identify the product for you, it'll tell you how much it costs on the web, you can see all the 5-star reviews, the 1-star reviews, you can see if it's anywhere near you, you can plot yourself on a map and see where that is next to you. And then, forget taking a picture of the barcode, just point your camera at the product, it'll identify it and do the same thing. Or better yet, go and take a picture of a place. Google has these little QR codes on their favorite 100 places. You point your camera at it, it tells you what the restaurant is, the menu, what the reviews are, phone number. Other things you can do with Google products and search, point it at a product, it'll identify it. Point it at a wine label, it'll tell you what you're looking at. Point it at a business card, it'll use OCR to scan the text and insert it into your address book. Point it at a work of art, it'll identify it for you. I have a bachelor's in art history, which is useless now. Point it at a landmark, it'll use your location and the image to identify what you're looking at. If you have a geography degree, I'm sorry. Point it at foreign language text, it'll translate it for you. And then the real mind blower, word lens. Not only do you point it at a picture, it'll translate the text and then put it back on the thing you're looking at. Right? Technical capability, anyone? Real use case, don't understand sign. Right? New technical capability, used to solve use case. Since I promised to throw in some financial stuff, this is Card.io. I basically take a picture of a credit card in order to process a payment. So just put up the credit card, take it in, it scans it, there it is, ta-da, success, card scanned, your payment has been processed. Another finance example, as I said, I promised, point the thing at a check to deposit it. About 9 different banks have deployed this now that I know of. And here's real fun. Point your picture, your camera at somebody. It'll use facial recognition technology to identify them and find their online profiles. Google chairman Eric Schmidt has said something scary. He says, it only takes us 7 photos to identify you using facial recognition technology. That's not the scary thing in it. The scary thing, he said, is you don't think there's 7 photos of you on the internet? This is a company called Polar Rose. Apple bought them about 1.5 years ago, so we'll see what that integration looks like. So I see some of this stuff, and I think it's very exciting, but we still have these constraints of, hold the phone up to something. And when I see people doing this stuff, I don't use Nokia's term point found, I use nerd found, frankly. There's futures, there's hope. This is an RFID reader attached to an iPhone. It essentially intercepts a little radio antenna signal off a digital barcode. So when you put it with something that has that ID, it starts playing the video from the car, and then it starts playing the video from the hippo. So all you really need is proximity here, right? You don't actually need to go and geek out by pointing your camera at something near you. So just to wrap this up, and I'm going to leave some time for questions. We've looked at a bunch of different capabilities. I still haven't covered everything, right? I didn't talk about device connections. I didn't talk about audio input. I didn't talk about the fact that we have dual cameras. What can you do with that? I didn't talk about ambient light sensing. I barely touched on NFC. So I'm trying to make sure we get some questions. Add-ons, we didn't talk anything about that, right? Things like Square, GoPay, whatever. All these things give us this new palette of capabilities for innovation. So the way to summarize all this stuff in a nutshell here, crazy growth happening, shift in what devices we sort of use primarily to access the net and the web, which leads to not only different constraints and capabilities, but also sort of new opportunities for engagement. The constraints of mobile screen sizes, networks, modes of use, all force us to focus and prioritize, to get down to the stuff that actually matters, right? Real world use cases. Less stuff that actually is interesting. And then all these capabilities we just saw, right? New palette of tools that we can use to solve people's problems and our business goals. It's not, ooh, look at how neat this technology is. When you do something that's just neat technology, it doesn't really go far. It's only interesting when you combine it with stuff that people actually want to do. So that's the story I have for you guys. I'm going to leave you with an opportunity to learn more, talk more about this if you're interested. I'm on the Twitters, I'm on the webs, and I'm very excited that a book on this topic, which this talk covers about a quarter of, comes out on Monday. If you're interested in that book, this is the website where you can procure that book. So thank you. I'll hang out. If any of you have to leave,